Hello everyone, it's Brett here, Lionheart84, and I've doing a short video today talking about a little bit about fruiting plant hardiness and the distinction I've started to make between fruit plants that are hardy in terms of the plant itself, and another level of hardiness that I consider fruit production hardiness, because I think they're two different things. I'll try and explain what I mean by that. The first thing is what is actually hardy in your area. I'm not talking about apple trees and pear trees. I'm talking about the slightly more unusual fruit plants that myself and quite a few people I know are trying to grow in their area, which sort of almost considered to be zone pushing. But to be truly hardy in your area, and in my area, I consider true hardiness a plant that you can leave in the ground permanently unprotected, and it will survive indefinitely without any issues. I'm not talking about a plant that you wrap up in 3 layers of fleece every winter or the first sign of frost, and I'm not talking about a plant that survives half decently for 2 or 3 years and then you get a cold winter like we've had this year in December and it's killed stone dead, or at least almost completely destroyed. That is not what I consider to be a fully hardy plant. Now, there are certain types of plants that fall into what I consider to be the Mediterranean and subtropical category, which appear, so far in my experience, to be absolutely fully hardy in terms of survival, but are not hardy in terms of fruit production, because our climate isn't really suitable for them to produce, except in favoured parts of the country and very sheltered gardens. So I just thought I'd quickly explain what I mean by that. Now, so far I found pineapple guavas and feijoas to be completely hardy in the southeast of England, and it would appear from other videos I've looked at now that only are they pretty much fully hardy, although they will take damage below -10, -9 or -10 degrees centigrade, which I'm unlikely to get here. They still seem to be capable of producing a reasonable standard of edible fruit by the end of October, beginning of November. Now, I would say that the fruit is not to the standard fruit that I've seen when they're growing in warm temperate climates, such as the parts of California, Florida, Australia, from Sydney down to Victoria, and areas such as Melbourne and parts of the Mediterranean. The fruits there appear to be a little bit earlier and a little bit larger and a little bit sweeter and better quality, but nevertheless the plants are capable of producing fruit, certainly in large parts of the UK. Perhaps not in Scotland without a little bit of protection, but I consider that a proper cold hardy fruit in terms of survival and in terms of fruiting. But what I'm sort of talking about more today is some of the plants that seem to survive here with no problems, but are much harder to fruit except in very favourable areas. So today I'm talking about plants like loquats and pomegranates, which I consider to have what I've defined as 2 levels of hardiness. It would appear that pomegranates in particular, as they're a deciduous plant, have no problems at all surviving -15, -20 centigrade, and would therefore probably be fine planted as far afield as large areas of Scotland. But what I have found is it is extremely difficult to get them to fruit unless they're in central urban areas, very well established, and in very sheltered gardens in warm spots. In fact, it's actually difficult to even get flowers on them in my area. They're very shy at flowering, and the problem we've got is because they don't wake up until probably May, late April, early May. They don't flower in my area until, this is outdoors I'm talking about, of course, planted in ground without protection. They don't seem to flower here until July or even August. And even if they set fruits, the fruits are unlikely to develop because the fruits take about 6 months excuse me, on a false fruited pomegranate to get from flower to edible fruit size. Now the dwarf one does tend to flower a little bit earlier because it only produces fruits about golf ball size or smaller. They have a much better chance of getting ripe. So the plant itself is extremely hardy, but it really needs a Mediterranean climate to fruit to a decent standard. But obviously I do know of pomegranate trees here that have produced edible fruits in very favoured areas and very favoured summers. And I'm posting the loquat into the same category as a fully cold hardy plant, but not a fully cold hardy fruiting plant, because we have the same problem with loquats here, or loquats, depending if you prefer to pronounce them that way. I also know some people call them loquats, even though they've got an A in them. The loquat or loquat flowers here and in its natural habitat normally in autumn leading into winter. Now the problem we have here, which I've demonstrated on my parents' plant, is the flowers in particular are very prone to extreme wet and cold temperatures in winter. The plant itself will easily handle -10 centigrade and probably -5 with not too serious damage. And my two plants, grafted plants that I have in my garden, have not got any damage whatsoever when we had the -7 with this thick snow on. But the problem, as shown by my parents' loquats or loquat, is that the flowers have been completely destroyed by the wet and cold because of the time of year they flowered. And also, following on to that, if you do get fruit set, the embryo fruits can also be damaged at -2 or -3 centigrade. So I don't consider the plant a reliable cold hardy fruiting plant. It will do better in central urban areas. There's quite a few specimens that I've seen in London that have embryo fruits on them that survive the winter without any problem and do produce edible fruits the next year. And there will be several other plants that come into this category as well. So far jujubes flower very readily here, and I do have friends, just excuse me while I pause the video a second. I was going to sneeze. And I do have friends here who are starting to get a handful of small jujubes on their mature trees, but they still don't fruit easily here, although the trees again seem to be extremely cold hardy, and I believe when they're dormant they'll handle -20. Persimmons the same, easily down to -20. But what I'm finding the problem for a lot of people is again, the persimmons and the jujubes are not prolific fruiters here, and again in particular persimmons are very prone to the flowers being destroyed by late frosts in late April and early May. So it's another one where the plant is very hardy, although the two of them, the plants are very hardy, but in the case of persimmons the flowers tend to get killed by late frost, which means they flower later than they should do by the time they've recovered, which is sort of late June, early July, which means the fruits are developing by sort of late October, early November. Now, if you've got a mature in-ground tree, it would appear that the fruits can develop to a decent edible standard, as shown by my friend Joe on his Rojo Brillant. However, it doesn't take much to upset the apple cart with persimmons, and again with jujubes. We had a particularly hot summer last summer, but if you get a cool, damp summer and the plants are late flowering, you're unlikely to get ripe jujubes or persimmons on your trees. So these are the sort of plants I'm talking about. I'm not, and again, the Chilean guavas, probably very hardy and seem to fruit reliably here, but there are certainly plants that will grow forever if you plant them in the ground. But you may, if you're not in the right parts of the country, and I'm really thinking about very sort of warm sheltered areas which don't get such cold weather in winter, and particularly inner urban areas where we get those sort of heat bubbles where the heat's trapped by the buildings and it keeps the plants much warmer. As you all know, there's a well-known avocado in central London that has fruits on it and has survived probably for 30 years, so you could consider it to be a cold hardy tree. But the problem is it's in an extreme microclimate and heat bubble in central London, and it doesn't unfortunately mean that I can plant an avocado tree in my garden and expect it to survive from year to year. In fact, I've a typical indication of that is I've had several my citrus, Myers lemon, which I've had in ground for 4 years, has done fine over the last 3 winters, and it's been absolutely destroyed this year. So it's not what I consider to be a fully cold hardy plant without protection. If you're prepared to wrap your citrus, even in my area, it's going to make a big difference. As with taking extra care, you can nurse a lot of plants through winter. But my strawberry guava has been killed virtually stone dead. I've got various other plants like the carob, which I've just featured in a video, which has taken bad cold damage. I had a Natal plum that was in my unheated summer house, that's been destroyed. So there are a lot of plants which would be considered half hardy. But even amongst the ones that are absolutely, totally cold hardy and you'd never protect, getting to fruit is another matter. So I've raised that, I've sort of raised that distinction between cold hardy as a plant and cold hardy as a fruiting plant. I don't think they're the same thing, and you might need to take a lot of extra precautions if you're attempting to get some of these plants to fruit in your area. We are better off in the southeast here, and along coastal areas there are zones which are definitely milder, but you might struggle in rural areas or further north if you want to try growing any of those. But that was just my take on 2 levels of cold hardiness for some of the more unusual subtropical and Mediterranean trees. They're not fully cold, they're fully cold hardy as plants, but they are not cold hardy in terms of fruit production in our climate without extra aid or freak locations or freak weather conditions. So sorry I've waffled on a bit, but I just thought it was something that interested me, that there are things like loquats and as I said, the not the feijoas, but pomegranates that you can grow without any problem as an ornamental in your garden, but you may never ever see flowers and fruits on them, but they will probably survive for year after year after year. So thanks for watching my bit of waffle, much appreciated. Please give me a thumbs up and share the video if you think it might interest people who are trying to grow some of these plants. Please subscribe to my channel, and remember to click on the bell if you'd like updates on new videos as they come out. I'll catch up with you on my next video. Brett out for now.